up to number 10, we have the Today Show and NBC. So if you've seen Apple's The Morning Show, which is loosely based around the events I'm about to tell you, you might already be familiar with this one. But the Today Show and NBC got in some major hot water after a slew of sexual assault allegations came out against the former host, Matt Lauer. It was made worse when Ronan Farrow released a book called Catch and Kill, where he exposed that years before Lauer's 2017 firing, over a 6 to 7 year period, allegedly there were 7 non-disclosure agreements made at the network, multiple of which involved Lauer. And after these revelations and some others, the public concluded that executives at NBC knew that Lauer was abusing women, but instead of doing something about it, they actually just covered it up in silence to the women. Then it got worse when Farrow also revealed that NBC was trying to suppress his reporting on Harvey Weinstein, again showing the company had a history of covering up for abusers. And after all this, people can truly not look at the network the same way again. And who can really blame them? In at number 9, Dote. So Dote is a fashion app targeted to young women, but the brand got huge backlash after they were accused of being racist during not one, but 2 of their brand trips. The first incident happened at Coachella, where they invited tons of girls to the festival with the brand and even got the girls a house that they could stay in. But after a few of the non-white girls made YouTube videos exposing the brand was swiftly canceled. The problem in the house was that the white and non-white girls were separated at 2 ends of the house. And the white girls got nice rooms with lavish beds, while the non-white girls were stuffed in makeshift rooms with beds that most people wouldn't even consider to be beds. Then the brand got more backlash after a similar thing happened during a Fiji brand trip, where the non-white girls were not being included in photo shoots and felt like an afterthought. A YouTuber, Kiana Naomi, made a whole video on it, explaining that she felt like she was the token black girl, and she felt like the brand hardly cared if she was even there or not. So both of these scandals happened shortly after one another, with very similar issues with both. The brand apologized, but no one really cared, as they were already canceled in most people's eyes. Next up at number 8, Facebook. So Facebook has come under fire for a lot of reasons over the last few years, with people calling them shady and exploiting their users' personal information for monetary gain. One of the worst times the company was called out was after the 2016 presidential election, when they got backlash for acting as a medium for fake ads for news designed to be divisive. The company tried to save face after this, but so many people felt that Russia had bought the election with fake ads that were run on Facebook. While their chief security officer was trying to defend them, he actually let it slip that the company made around $100,000 for ads connected to 470 inauthentic Facebook pages that were likely operated out of Russia. And although the company has vowed to stop fake news on their platform, many are dissatisfied, as it's still a huge problem on the site. Now, the company actually got some good press when they announced that it was going to change its ad policies, and this would ban politicians from lying in their ads. But the company got a lot of flack when they decided to reverse that policy, and now politicians are allowed to lie in their ads again. Also, there's tons of speculation that they are listening to you through the mic on your phone, with people getting ads for things on Facebook and Instagram, which Facebook owns, for things right after they searched or said them, which is a little creepy and suspicious. In at number 7, United Airlines. So I spoke about this one in another video, but on the off chance that you missed it, I just felt that I needed to bring this up and remind everyone of this terrible scandal. So United Airlines canceled themselves after a video went viral of a passenger on one of their flights shown getting forcibly removed from his seat. And the whole exchange was so violent that the man actually had blood running down his face while he was being pulled away. And the worst part is the reason for all this, as United forced him off the plane because they had overbooked the flight, but let him on the plane anyways. So here the company was physically abusing a passenger that did nothing wrong, all because they messed up and overbooked the flight. And all this, of course, caused massive outrage against the company. But this PR nightmare continued when the public found the CEO's apology very forced and half-hearted. And the company lost massive earnings from their stock dropping as well after this whole thing. Next up at number 6, Uber. Uber is a company that has completely revolutionized the ride service industry, but it has done a lot of shady things that have made some people second guess using the app. 2017 was a particularly rough year for the brand, with an open letter to the company getting published by a former employee detailing the prevailing culture of sexism and sexual harassment at the company. Then about a month later, the CEO actually got caught up in a huge scandal after he was shown getting into a heated argument with an Uber driver, forcing a public apology from him. And after the company had seen more than a few rough months, 13 company executives resigned in the first half of 2017 alone. And then the last bit of scandal was when the Wall Street Journal published an article that showed that Uber was the subject of an FBI investigation for illegally interfering with rival company Lyft. And then the company is also just constantly called out for treating its drivers poorly and for putting its passengers in danger by not vetting the drivers well enough. Comment down below, are you an Uber or a Lyft person? I'd really love to know. I kind of go back and forth, just whoever's cheaper. How are we doing? Number 5, the Trump Organization. So the Trump Organization, which is made up of all his hotels, golf courses, and other real estate, definitely has taken a hit since Trump has become president. Since Trump is such a polarizing figure, it makes sense that people that are against his political policies would also be against his companies. And with Trump, at some points in his presidential tenure, being the least popular president in US history, anything with his name on it is going to have a similar effect. The largest scandal surrounding Trump and his hotel is the idea that he is now expensing tons of his lavish vacation stays as president to his hotels, essentially ensuring that his business profits off all the travel that he does. It got so bad that 17 Democratic members of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee signed a letter urging the organization to further investigate potential conflicts of interest between Trump's corporate interests and his presidential duties. Next up at number 4, Walmart. Good old Walmart. Truly, what shitty thing has this company not done? With them coming under fire for paying their employees a starvation wage that was actually discovered to cost taxpayers millions. It got so bad that in 2013, workers held massive demonstrations to demand $25,000 a year or more in wages. And that same year, the House of Representatives found that one Walmart store can cost taxpayers close to $1 million in food stamps and other assistance programs because of the low wages the workers are paid. And considering there are thousands of stores across the country, this should be concerning to everyone. As well as mistreating employees, there's also a lot of speculation that the company refuses to make employees full-time at all costs so that they don't have to give the workers any benefits. As well, Walmart is constantly called out for picking on the little guy, as the store is known for coming into small towns and decimating every other business in the area as a result of their low pricing. Next up at number 3, Dolce and Gabbana. I honestly feel like this brand does all that they possibly can to get canceled with all the controversial stuff that they say and then refuse to apologize for. Just to touch on some of the few of their biggest scandals, one was back in 2012 when the brand debuted a set of earrings with colonial-style imagery of black women at their spring fashion show. Many called the brand out for being offensive and racist. Then in 2015, they made huge news when Dolce and Gabbana said in an interview with an Italian magazine, Panorama, that they are against the idea of gay parents, continuing that they're against gay adoptions and even saying that they're against IVF, calling the children made out of that process synthetic children. After this, many celebrities, among them Elton John, called for a boycott. Then the last one that I'm going to touch on is a drama that is so unnecessary. It highlights to me the fact that this brand just does not care at all what people think of them. In 2012, Gabbana publicly commented on an Italian fashion page that was featuring photos of Selena Gomez, a phrase that translates to, "she's so ugly." So yeah, after this, it's not hard to conclude that they have canceled themselves and completely deteriorated their rep to the point that many celebrities now refuse to wear their clothing. And yeah, cannot blame them at all. And at number 2, Apple. So Apple is a very controversial company with millions across the globe loving their products while trying to forget the horrible things that they have done to make them. One huge blow was back in 2014 when an undercover investigation by the BBC found that workers in Chinese factories that made outsourced Apple products worked in awful conditions, being forced to work 60-hour weeks and almost never getting breaks, as well as enforcing disgusting laws like making it forbidden to sit while working under any circumstances. Then the investigation went deeper down the supply chain, and they discovered that these Chinese factories were being supplied by Indonesian mines. And despite Apple claiming that they sourced their materials ethically, this found that they definitely did not, with landslides frequently harming minors and kids as young as 12 living in fear for their lives. And this is even more appalling as Apple is one of the richest companies in the world, with more cash on hand than most countries in the world. So this makes their gross conditions even more disturbing and greedy. And finally, at number 1, we have Forever 21. So Forever 21 and other stores like H&M and Zara have quickly gone from being beloved by all to being canceled for negatively affecting the fashion industry and harming the planet with their fashion. For Forever 21 in particular, the policies are very anti-customer, with returns not being allowed and only exchange or store credit being a way to get rid of unwanted garments. And these policies have been called out as a sneaky way of getting way less returns. Forever 21 is also a leader in the so-called fast fashion or disposable fashion industry, selling tons of cheap and trendy clothes that are kind of made to fall apart, as quality is the absolute last of their concern. But the fast fashion initiative that they pioneered is terrible for pretty much everyone, with overseas workers that are grossly underpaid being the reason for the cheap clothing, and with independent fashion designers being completely ripped off after the brand copies their garment and then mass produces it, effectively ensuring that no one's going to pay a premium for the real deal. And this also gets customers used to spending way more money on a variety of clothes that will end up falling apart, giving them little reason to pay a premium for good quality fashion. So starting off at number 10, we have Amazon. So this one is somewhat fresh tea, so I wanted to include it first. So if you didn't know, Amazon owns Whole Foods, and Whole Foods got in a lot of backlash a few weeks ago when, in response to the global virus, they told employees that one option for getting more time off or sick days during all this is to donate their paid time off to coworkers facing medical emergencies, with the CEO saying in an internal memo, quote, "Team members who have a medical emergency or passing in their immediate family can receive donated paid time off hours," Mackey wrote in an email reviewed by Motherboard. Then the company said they would offer unlimited unpaid time off for those who want it and paid time off for those found to have contracted the virus. And this ticked a lot of people off, as Amazon is one of the richest companies in the world right now, with Jeff Bezos being the world's richest person running it. And it seemed to everyone online that they could pretty easily afford to pay its hourly employees for sick days taken during this time without breaking the bank. But instead they asked their hourly wage employees, who are probably already struggling, to donate their paid time off. So this is just a recent one, but the company has been in so many scandals regarding how they treat their employees and the fact that they are decimating a lot of businesses in their global rise. Next up at number 9, McDonald's. So McDonald's is another brand that constantly gets into hot water regarding how they treat their employees, even though they are the highest grossing restaurant chain in America. Ranker even gave the company the title of the second worst retailer to work for, so you know they're pretty bad. The company has also been accused of using their power and money to twist stories into their favor, like the famous one where a woman sued McDonald's after she was burned on their hot coffee, and the media painted this woman as a money-hungry idiot, when in reality McDonald's really was at fault and she actually won the case, because with all the evidence presented, it was pretty clear that the coffee truly was too hot. And she was not the first person to complain about it. Over 700 customers suffered from burns from their drinks. Evidence also proved that McDonald's coffee was served 30 to 40 degrees hotter than other companies. So if you heard that story the way McDonald's wanted you to, you would side with the company. But if you heard the true facts, it's clear McDonald's was in the wrong here and wanted to bully her into a settlement. Next up at number 8, TikTok. So TikTok is one that we have talked about on the channel before. The most shocking thing about the company to me, that I'm shocked that no one's really talking about, is the fact that they ban people they consider ugly, overweight, or poor from getting on their For You page. An example of this happening is when they took down videos of Lizzo in a swimsuit, but kept up other videos of girls dancing in swimsuits like Charli D'Amelio. The company has also had a huge problem with child predators and has not done much about it. And there's also a lot of speculation that since the company is Chinese owned, they censor any political speech, especially when it's against the Chinese Communist Party. Up at number 7, Volkswagen. So this is one I completely forgot about, but I just need to bring it back because it is incredibly shocking and I think you guys really need to know it. A few years back, Volkswagen got in a huge scandal when the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, found that many VW cars being sold in America had a defeat device or software in diesel engines that could detect when they were being tested, changing the performance accordingly to improve results. So essentially, they made the vehicle improve its emissions while being tested in order to dupe customers and the government into thinking they are more eco-friendly than they are. And after this came out, the company admitted to the whole thing. The EPA's findings included 482,000 cars in the US only, including the VW manufactured Audi A3 and various VW models. But VW has admitted that about 11 million cars worldwide, including 8 million in Europe, are also fitted with this so-called defeat device. And of course, after all of this, their stock price fell off a cliff. This also resulted in the company paying huge fines to various countries affected. And at number 6, Juul. So Juul is another company that's very controversial and is at the center of a lot of debate about e-cigarettes and other vaping devices. Tobacco use has been declining for teenagers over the years, but with the recent rise of e-cigs, many young people are picking up the habit once again. The stats show that e-cigarette use has more than doubled among high schoolers from 2017 to 2019. Many have blamed Juul and its small portable e-cigarettes for contributing to the rise in underage nicotine use and addiction. The campaign for tobacco-free kids says Juuls may have especially high doses of nicotine that can hook users, giving the brand a really bad look. As well, they have fruity and sweet flavors that also lure in kids. But after a ton of backlash against the company and its products, the US government banned all fruity, dessert, or mint flavors from cartridge-based e-cigarettes like Juuls. So the company definitely took a hit with that one. Halfway through at number 5, RyanAir. RyanAir is a European airline known for super cheap travel between European cities. But they have had a slew of PR disasters that have caused a lot of people to think differently about them. One time that got a lot of press was when they failed to remove a racist passenger from one of their flights. And some were more angry that they made the victim of the attack change seats, not the attacker themselves. And what many saw as a negligent move, the airline only reacted and contacted police after the attack went viral on social media. Then when they did apologize, it was a very brief and half-assed apology that many felt was not sincere. And it was too little too late. As a result, campaigners urged passengers to boycott the airline, and hashtag RyanAir is racist began trending on Twitter. Up at number 4 is SeaWorld. So SeaWorld's public image has been tarnished for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest is from the huge documentary Blackfish that focused on the horrible living conditions of their famous orca whales. After the documentary got lots of attention, their stock fell 33% after they admitted attendance to its flagship San Diego Sea Park had slowed in the second quarter. And then huge activist organizations like PETA got involved and begged SeaWorld to release the killer whales from captivity. Legislation is now being proposed in California to study the impact of captivity on large marine animals and whether they should be released. Wells Fargo even ended up downgrading the company, saying competitive pressures and media fallout appear modestly greater than originally thought. This all resulted in SeaWorld pledging mass upgrades to the habitats of its orca whales, doubling the size of their tanks and building treadmills for exercise. But PETA didn't see this move as a step up, calling this tank upgrade as just a desperate drop in the bucket move. Ouch. Let me know below if documentaries like Blackfish made you second guess going to SeaWorld or other places like that, or even zoos. Has that had an impact on you? Let me know below. In at number 3, Yum Brands. Yum Brands, which owns brands like KFC and Taco Bell, got in a lot of hot water after it was discovered that they were selling expired meat, and even meat that fell on the floor, by mixing it with good meat. A television report in China depicted a popular meat supplier to the chain intentionally selling expired meat. Yum Brands said the news coverage, which triggered a government investigation, resulted in a significant negative impact to the sales at its restaurants. And like, no right? McDonald's was also another company caught up in this scandal, and their Asian sales dropped more than 7% as a result of the food quality issues. And as a result, both companies apologized and dropped the supplier. But it can be hard to forget something like this after you hear about it, so it's not crazy to assume that their sales dipped for a while after the incident. Next up at number 2, Monsanto. So Monsanto is one that's hard not to talk about, considering that when you search their name, one of the first results is Monsanto is evil. No joke. And they are widely known as one of the most hated companies on earth. So now you're probably asking, why? Well, the company has had a long history of developing dangerous products that have harmed customers and even left permanent damage to American fields. The company has also gotten a lot of media attention for enforcing their seeding policies using scare tactics and other similar tactics used by the mafia. They use these tactics to be feared by American farmers, and they hit any farmer who does not comply with their outrageous policies with expensive lawsuits. And the reason they can get away with this is because they essentially have a monopoly over the American seed business, accounting for 90% of America's soybean seeds. Some of the specific tactics they use are going into fields and farm towns and secretly videotaping farmers and store owners, infiltrating community meetings, and using informants to gather info on farmers. Yeah, sounds like the mafia to me. They've even been said to try and pressure farmers into signing papers that give Monsanto access to their private records. Their team of agents are referred to by farmers as the seed police, and people use words such as Gestapo and mafia to describe their tactics, One of the most controversial policies is that farmers are not able to save any seeds for replanting, forcing them to buy new seeds each year, even though reusing old seeds has been a practice used since ancient times. So yeah, I can see why this company is incredibly problematic. Hopefully the government does something about these tactics to protect farmers. Let me know any more about Monsanto that I missed below, because straight up there is so much on this company. And finally, at number 1, Boeing. So this one's actually kind of recent. If you recall, Boeing got in a huge scandal and faced a ton of lawsuits following incidents with their 737 MAX jetliner. In October 2018, a Boeing 737 MAX crashed shortly after takeoff. Then a similar incident took place in March of 2019. Over 150 people were killed in both accidents. As a result, the FAA grounded all further flights of the 737 MAX, and Boeing suspended its production. But the huge backlash came when it was discovered that Boeing knew of this issue for years, but did not disclose the information. Engineers told CNN that the main issue was that the 737 MAX relied on a single sensor that's prone to malfunctions, and it would only work correctly with an optional safety feature that a lot of airlines did not purchase. In both crashes, it appeared this sensor sent a signal that the plane was stalling when it wasn't, causing the planes to crash. Allegedly, Boeing first knew of these issues in 2017, but the company executives did not think it risked customers' safety enough to do anything about it. And I remember after this, anyone who had a flight coming up using the 737 MAX had to make this decision whether to follow through with the flight and potentially risk their lives. It was a really, really weird time. So starting off at number 10, we have easyJet. So this one is pretty freaking insane, I'm not gonna lie. So some passengers were on an easyJet flight were delayed for 13 hours due to some issues with the plane. One passenger was holding a baby and approached an employee at the counter. And when the customer went to ask the employee some questions, the employee allegedly first pushed the phone out of the guy's hand. And then after that happened, and the man was confused and trying to protect the baby, the employee then allegedly slapped the man in his face. What? Some other passengers even corroborated this guy's story. So after this insane incident, the airline went into full damage control mode, obviously, and released a statement that the employee had no link to easyJet and he was actually an employee of Samsung, which is an independent contract. But of course, after an incident like this, people were still not happy and felt that they deflected the blame instead of doing more to rectify the situation. Next up at number 9, Johnson & Johnson. So back in 2019, Johnson & Johnson got into a huge scandal when they had to recall over 30,000 bottles of their baby powder after the FDA discovered traces of asbestos in the product. And the company finally decided to recall it after many years of the public protesting against the potentially harmful ingredient that was even said to be a carcinogen. And this was not really a shock to some, as the company had over 15,000 lawsuits from customers who alleged that the powder made them develop cancer. At the time this article was written, the company was still trying to argue that its baby powder is safe, but analysts did estimate that all the lawsuits could result in up to a $10 billion payout for the company. But considering all the speculation still around the safety of the product, I'm pretty confident it's had a huge impact on the reputation of the product, and it's probably made it take a sales hit as well. Let me know if you're a mom, are you still buying Johnson & Johnson baby powder for your kid? And at number 8, Cinnabon. So Cinnabon got some backlash after customers and Star Wars fans thought that the chain was trying to capitalize off of the passing of Carrie Fisher much too soon after it happened. Basically, the company posted a tweet of an ad where you can see the outline of her character, Princess Leia, but with a Cinnabon roll taking the place of her famous Star Wars hairdo. People had more than a few problems with this. One was that it seemed like the company was trying to profit off of the unfortunate event and then pass it off as somewhat of an endorsement of sorts. And then true fans were even more angry, as it was known that Fisher actually hated that hairstyle, which she criticized for most of her life, and that made it even more out of line. Of course, the brand ended up deleting the tweet and apologizing, but the damage had already been done, with many still outraged over the decision. And at number 7, BP. So this is one that I am sure you've heard of. But BP got into a massive scandal when they were responsible for one of the worst environmental disasters in history that took place back in 2010. Their Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded, which resulted in the loss of 11 lives of their employees. Then after the explosion, the rig sank into the Gulf of Mexico and spilled oil all over the region. Now the spill is estimated to have been the largest marine oil spill in history history, with between 2.5 and 4.2 million barrels of oil flowing into the ocean over an 87-day period before the well was capped, forming an oil slick thousands of square miles wide. And of course, this spill had a devastating impact on the environment and tourism to that region. And although BP did end up cleaning the mess, the public was understandably not happy about the whole situation, and it got worse when BP's chief executive Tony Hayward made public sentiment even worse, remarking at one point, quote, "I'd like my life back," and saying other things in interviews that made public outrage against the company even worse, resulting in him being replaced shortly after the incident. By the next year after the spill, the company had lost almost a quarter of its market value, and it had spent over $40 billion in costs associated with the cleanup. And at number 6, Foxconn. So if you didn't already know, Foxconn is a Chinese company that manufactures an estimated 40% of the world's consumer electronics, including components for the iPhone, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. But in 2010, there was massive outrage against the company after it was discovered that many of their employees had taken their own lives while working for the company, drawing much needed attention to the poor labor conditions at their factory. After much investigation took place, it was discovered that the average worker worked in 12-hour-long shifts and received a cafeteria meal allowance worth just 65 cents. And it was also determined that these employees took their lives as a protest against the terrible conditions. And after this was all discovered, the reputation of not only Foxconn, but Apple and HP were seriously tarnished. After this, Foxconn took somewhat of a no-comment approach, which resulted in various protests against them in China. And Apple made a statement that they were sending their own team in to investigate the situation. But as of now, Foxconn still supplies Apple, which I guess says a lot about Apple themselves. Halfway through at number 5, Adidas. So Adidas got into some really hot water when, after runners completed the Boston Marathon in 2017, they received an email congratulating them for, quote, surviving the marathon. And this is very triggering considering of the events that took place at the Boston Marathon in 2013 that resulted in lost lives and hundreds of injuries. Of course, after this, people were not happy with the unpleasant reminder of these events and urged the company to rethink that subject line. Thankfully, the company completely understood the backlash and apologized, writing, quote, "We are incredibly sorry. Clearly, there was no thought given to the insensitive email subject line that was sent Tuesday," in a statement they sent to Time. I don't think the brand suffered too much from this one. Next up at number 4 is FIFA. So if you're a really big soccer fan, you might have heard of this one. If not, we have a case of corruption here. Back in 2015, the US Department of Justice indicted executives and officials on charges of racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering conspiracy. The indictment details over $150 million in bribes taken by FIFA's executives from advertisers for providing them with marketing rights, starting way back in 1991. Switzerland opened their own investigation around the same time, one confirming that FIFA executives enriched each other with as much as $80 million. As a result of the scandal, FIFA reported net losses of $122.4 million in 2015, $368 million in 2016, and $191 million in 2017. So they definitely took a huge financial hit from this one. And I really want to know, if you're a soccer fan and you did hear of this, did it impact the way you looked at FIFA after? And at number 3, Turing Pharmaceuticals. So this one has just greed and disgust written all over it. So back in 2015, the former CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals increased the cost of the life-saving drug Daraprim by 5,000%, driving the price of the drug from $13.50 to $750 per pill. The drug, which costs less than $1 to manufacture, is a medicine for a condition that can lead to life-threatening infections in people who are HIV positive and affects over 2,000 Americans a year. And I'm sure you guys have heard of this one, as it caused massive public outrage. The CEO was then required to testify in front of Congress over the company's pricing tactics and was eventually convicted in an unrelated case of securities fraud, for which he's currently serving a 7-year prison sentence. But this definitely is not the only case of a pharmaceutical company gouging prices, as the company that produces EpiPens boosted the product's price by over 400% one year. So unfortunately, it looks like consumers might encounter more of these as time goes on, but hopefully the government steps in and regulates this kind of stuff. And at number 2, Fyre Festival. Okay, so I truly don't know how it's taken me so long to talk about this one, but this was a disaster that was so bad it spurred a whole documentary on the incident. Back in 2017, a bunch of young people arrived on an island in the Bahamas expecting to see the greatest music festival of all time, as it had been advertised as a luxurious festival with top-tier talent on the beach, promoted by the likes of Kendall Jenner and Bella Hadid. But when patrons arrived, they discovered the whole thing was basically a sham, and the island was not prepared at all for people to be staying there. The site's housing was FEMA disaster relief tents, and their food was bread, slices of cheese, and salad. And almost as soon as the guests showed up, the disaster went viral on social media, with festival guests tweeting about the free-for-all. After the event completely fell apart, the event organizer, Billy McFarland, was sentenced to 6 years in prison on 2 counts of wire fraud and ordered to pay $26 million in restitution. He's also currently facing several class action lawsuits. And of course, after a disaster like this, anybody who had their name on that can never really be trusted in the industry again. And finally, taking the #1 spot, we have HUAWEI. So HUAWEI has faced a lot of negative speculation from governments, as is a Chinese company, with the brunt of it coming from the United States. The allegations were that the company's wireless networking equipment could contain backdoors enabling surveillance by the Chinese government. As a response to this, HUAWEI responded that its product did not pose any more of a risk than those from other companies. However, these concerns against the company intensified when development of 5G networks began, and many countries decided to implement restrictions on the use of Chinese-made hardware in these networks. This got even worse when the Canadian government detained a senior executive at HUAWEI named Meng Wanzhou, who happens to be the founder's daughter as well. And since the Chinese government was not happy about this, China then detained 2 Canadians as a retaliation. After this clear act of retaliation, both the US and Canada banded together against the company. And for a current update, the 2 Canadians are still detained in China, and Meng Wanzhou is still in Vancouver waiting for her situation to be legally resolved. But this is definitely not a good look for the company, and has caused many people outside of China to second guess buying any of their products.